And we're live to review the second part of a wonderful episode called Something Sacred. Over to Jeff for his thoughts, or rather, David B226 Morris's thoughts.
It almost sounded like you were going Dalek on me for a second there.
Maybe I'll go Colonel K later. I don't know.
All right, I guess we'll need to make this quick then.
No, I'm okay. Yeah. I'm pretty.
Cool. As Ben said, this is the second half of Something Sacred, which you could call episode 13 of season 6, because 12 and 13 were actually originally presented as one episode, but originally aired January 30th, 1998. Written by David Simon and Anya Epstein and directed by Yuli Adele. And yes, let's find out what Mr. Morris had to say about the second Sacred. He says, in the second part of this double episode, we get to see how the police answer challenges like the murders of two priests. They play decoy. We see Pembleton, Falzone, Munch, there's one that needs imagination, and Bayless, who has just returned from his vacation, dressing up as priests trying to attract the murderous felons. This works about as well as you'd expect. There are 6 robbery attempts, but none of them the type they're looking for. By now, it is clear that both of the murders were committed in the course of robberies. When the second priest, a Monsignor, was murdered, his parish was ransacked and a chalice was stolen. The evidence also seems to point even more strongly towards the 2 Guatemalan refugees who have fled the scene. Eventually, the highway patrol catches up to them in Frederick with money in their possession. Their attorney, the nun who was responsible for the refugees' passage into this country, finds them and insists that they are not the ones responsible for the murders. As it turns out, however, the sisters' faith is justified. Ballard and Gardy track the chalice to a pawn shop and find what seems to be no help. Whoever pawned used Whitney Houston as a name and left a burned-out building as the place of residence. However, using some local geography, Ballard tracks down another lead, our friend Rock, last seen making a suspicious phone call near a rectory. Now, actually, I think he was last seen walking off with his boombox, but anyway. Rock is a tough young man. He's already had some juvenile arrests, and when we next see him, he's selling vials to a woman in a car. But Ballard doesn't think he had anything to do with the murder, but she does think, however, he may know who did. Up until this point, the main focus on the religious aspect of these killers has been Gardy. We see him clearly affected seeing the body of the Monsignor in the morgue, confessing his doubts about the case to Falzone, and paying tribute to both priests in an honorarium when they lie in state. But after they catch up with Rock, Gardy's fury about the case leads him to attacking the callous man, leaving Ballard no choice but to throw him out. The interrogation, therefore, is conducted by Ballard and Pembleton, the other primary on the murder. For 4 hours, they drill the young man using the idea of the preciousness of life, something that a drug peddler on the corner knows is false. So Frank tries another approach, shoving Lamar, his real name, into a morgue freezer filled with young black men. Then he and Ballard drive him out to the Chesapeake, which Lamar calls the ocean, and shows him something no corner boy normally sees. He then confronts Lamar with the simple truth: he's going to die young and alone. So the question is, when Lamar was alive, did he really live? Under other circumstances, this might come off as corny, but Brower has the delivery to pull it off. The killers turn out to be 2 corner boys Rock hung with, one of whom is his cousin. He also confirms that he was outside the first church a few weeks ago, but he didn't have the spirit to go any further. Admittedly, it is somewhat disappointing to follow Gardy for most of 2 episodes and then have him disappear off stage for the final 20 minutes. Still, it is Peter Garrity's work that remains with you for both episodes, that of the cop who every day sees evil in the world and yet takes his family to church every Sunday. In many ways, this is Garrity's most complex performance. While most of the second hour focuses on the investigation, we do follow one of the stories from the previous hour, the location of Meldrick Lewis, who pops up behind the headquarters looking even scruffier than usual. He reveals himself only to Falzone and has no urge to see any of his fellow detectives, particularly Kellerman. He asks his partner for background and rap sheets on 3 felons, all of whom it turns out are players in the Mahoney organization. We have no idea what Lewis is up to, only his vague remark that he is going to take the offensive against Georgia Ray. Even more obvious is the continued deterioration of Kellerman. Mike gets positively hammered at the waterfront, insults Dr. Cox, and throws his car keys in the river. Stumbling home, he accidentally runs into a dealer who looks at him funny and who his drunken imagination identifies as Luther Mahoney, which leads him to pistol whip him and leave him unconscious in the street. He also berates Meldrick for not coming to see him when he saw Falzone. The rift between Mike and the squad is rapidly becoming a fissure. The overall effect of both parts of Something Sacred is a well-crafted, multi-layered story, though it's not as well-crafted as some of the other multi-part stories. The greater realism of this one, the good performances from Thorne, Garrity, and Brower, combined with the fine guest work of Avery Waddell as Rock and Leslie Silva as Sister Diane, lead to a well-written and well-done episode. Combined with some well-chosen blues music as background, and you've got some good TV, it's a shame that no more mini-movies would be made in Homicide's remaining year and a half, or that even future two-parters would not be as well-written and desensationalized as this was. That would have been something to believe in. My score, 8.6. So that's what he says. Mr. Ben, what say you? Don't forget to turn your mic on.
You're absolutely right there, Jeff, as per usual. So yeah, I thought that there was one scene with Stuart Gardy where I thought he wasn't quite as well played as in the previous episode, but the rest of the episode he was good, and it seemed to focus on him. The one aspect of the main plot that I was let down by was it sets up this good situation where Rock won't break under pressure. And I was thinking, oh, good, this is like setting a good challenge for Frank. But I thought the way they got out of it, it just disappointed me. I
was a little bit, I don't know. I thought the part where they took him out to the bay was a little bit weird. The morgue part, seemed a little bit more, even if, something that his lawyer might not be down with. It seemed like something that, if that was, I said at the time seeing it, that's the real Scared Straight. I'll just have you stay in the morgue for a while. They don't really say how long he was in there, but the other part, it was kind of like, is he trying to make him think he's going to shoot him out there, or he's going to say, take off running and I'll shoot you in the back or something? But they really, it's just kind of odd the way they did that. But
now, is there some significance to the scarf here? Is it a particular local team?
It doesn't look like it here, but I don't know. It's green and white.
Could it be
none of the major league professional teams of Baltimore have green and white as colors, but I don't know about all the colleges or anything.
Could it be an Irish thing? Maybe it's a...
Yeah, that's possible.
Right. What else? I like the fact that the actor playing Mahoney, he had to say one line, he gets an episode fee for a new appearance.
Yeah, they gave him a special thanks at the end, in the end credits, so I don't know how much they got paid for that, but wasn't listed as a regular guest star, just a special thanks.
Yeah. But I thought there was quite an interesting look on his face, so he played it quite well. That actor sort of like put a little bit of comedy in it, I suppose. Just like in the type of grin on his face. I thought it was pretty good acting from. I mean, yet again, it's another example of, and Battlestar Galactica had this, where it was you have somebody playing in the STP character, and if they're a really, really good actor or actress, they can just about pull it off if you sort of give them storylines that are too much to that are like pushing it a bit in terms of believability, but you could just about pull it off. Did you think his acting was believable, Jeff? Like the acting drunk and all the stuff like that, or did you just feel that the character was out of place in the way
What are you talking about now?
Kellerman.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it seemed. I've never had a problem, believing Reed Diamond is Kellerman, so it just seemed like, yeah, it's just another, good episode for him. Didn't have a lot to do, but he did what he did.
Because I found that where it's almost as if in shows, if they have a good actor or actress, they tend to like, oh, let's push them, let's see what they can do. And so the character might end up doing things that are a little bit extreme, but it's because the performance, it can be pulled off. So you might end up with a situation where it's like, well, I don't agree with what's happened to the character, but it's well acted.
Yeah, and that's how I felt a lot about what they did with Kellerman, because I don't think all the while I thought his acting was good. It's just the story had its ups and downs, but this was. Morgan said it was the best part of this episode. His little drunken hallucinations of Luther Mahoney and all that.
Yeah.
So.
We do get these things like, I mean, because we're at a point in the series' life where certain things keep repeating, like the theme of religion with Frank. And yeah, and there was some good lines from Frank about, there was one about belief and fools, I believe.
Yeah, and that's another reason that I both love and relate to the character of Pembleton, because he says things, he tells you how he feels about a lot of things, but at the same time that he sort of performs in that performer sense, like he kind of likes to be dramatic in the way he says things, and at the same time it's like, so you're like, okay, well, is he just kind of saying this? We had a couple episodes ago, he told Bayless. Bayless reminded him of something he said 4 years ago that stuck with him, and Hamilton was like, I was just, making small talk or whatever, it wasn't. He didn't see it as big, as significant a thing as Bayless had. And so it's kind of the same thing here, where there's always that element of how much is just sort of, he's kind of wanting to have a dramatic moment, and how much is really coming passionately from inside of him.
Yeah.
And I like the fact that he's kind of all over the place sometimes. There are some things that are consistent about him, but he also, when it comes to his own personal faith, he's obviously torn by it, and he makes that pretty clear that he's not somebody who's, Gardy was sort of like the one making the case for the Catholic Church, kind of trying to say, well, it has its flaws, but there's still a reason why to believe in this. Whereas Pembleton sort of goes back and forth. He's drawn to it. It's sort of like there's an attraction to it, where he wants to believe in things, but then another part of him sees the reality that he sees on his job and in his life, and it's like he can't reconcile the two completely. Yeah. And of course, in this episode, we had Gardy and Falzone discussing it, basically, where Falzone's saying, yeah, I might have gone to church when I was a kid, but I don't really follow up with it. But he sort of, he says to Gardy, if that's what faith is for, is like believing when you don't have the evidence, And so it's sort of like, one other thing I like about the show is that you just have those sort of personal character moments from people that are just expressing their feeling at that time about whatever it is. And they don't necessarily have a particular agenda, really. They're just sort of stating their perspective on it. And so we got little things like Munch speaking in Yiddish to the one dude who was was asking him if he was okay when he was dressed as a priest, But he tells him go with God, but he says it in Yiddish. So it's like he's maintaining that bit of his Jewish...
Yeah, his bit of his authenticity.
Yeah.
But also, as part of the ENTP knows that that'd be funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was surprised in that string of pictures that I didn't see one of Munch as a priest. I figured you would for sure have taken one of that.
Well, I was exercising at the time, and I didn't I wasn't able to snap it.
Well, I think I personally, I can't tell you what to do. Far be it from
Yeah.
me, but I personally would think that maybe, when you're not doing exercises, you should go back and take a few pictures, and maybe they could end up in the season in review video or something at least.
Right. I might go back and like take a snap a bunch and make him the thumbnail.
Yeah, I think especially Munch dressed as a priest with his gun drawn is a pretty good picture. Because he pulled out his gun when the one dude was trying to rob him.
In previous seasons, I've complained about the music. I think this season the music's been okay, especially like when they have the music when it's like on the street and that they choose like better hip hop.
Yeah, I mean it's comes and goes. I usually like most of the musical choices, not always. Every once in a while, there's something I'm kind of like this doesn't go well, but most of the time I think they're pretty good.
But yeah, I mean so given that Morgan thought that the Kellerman storyline was, well, not the Kellerman storyline, but his sort of like reaction to like being drunk was like the best part of the episode, but overall he doesn't like what happened to Kellerman that I don't know about yet. So I don't really know where I'm going with this. I'm just sort of like, at the moment I still find that storyline interesting, the Mahoney.
Yeah, I think it is interesting.
Oh yeah.
In terms of that there's lingering elements of all of that are never going to entirely go away, but of course in this episode we have introduced another element where you have what is Lewis doing in his little on suspension but still doing work.
Oh, and yeah, and that's interesting as well. And what is interesting is like Lewis's attitude towards Georgia Mahoney, where it's like he's not like cutting her any slack because she's a woman. It's like treating her the same way that he would treat a man. For like, and even now people like in all this calling her a bitch and things like that, and things that other series wouldn't do with their lead characters, I suppose. I mean,
but I guess it's a good thing that he doesn't think she's hot then, because he probably would be treating her differently if he did.
Oh yes, I remember. Although he's always like he's got a bit of an eye for the ladies. Like you always see him looking around. Yes, I remember.
Because I think that'd be one element that might actually make the story a little more interesting, is if there was an attraction there, but he was also sort of like the enemy, but also he was attracted to her, but they never really, didn't go that route. But
yeah, I mean we touched on it a bit before. I mean, like, so for I mean, you've compared, like, say, in NYPD Blue, where you said you had like a bigoted character, and but did any of the lead characters on there hit a woman?
I don't remember off the top of my head. I mean, there were like 12 seasons, so
yeah,
there was a lot, and it depends on who you consider lead characters, because there were a lot of people that came and went over the years on that show. So, but yeah, I just watched the episode just a few days ago where Sipowicz was like trying to sort of explain the source of his racism. But anyway, that's another show.
yeah.
So back to Homicide. I thought Bayless had a funny line when he said Kellerman was pissed off because I look better in black than he does.
That's more of his recently explored side coming out, I suppose.
Thought that was an amusing line.
Yeah, I got a bit of the feeling that it was sort of like mid-season tiredness from the writers, and like they get a bit knackered in the middle of the season, and because they know they have to have a big push towards the end, and they know they have to have good episodes at the start because those episodes tend to be reviewed. And I know this was like trying to make this the mid-season climax, but
well, the network was jacking them around once again, though, because they renewed them, said you're coming back for another season, and then they preempted them for February sweeps that year. So I don't even remember what they showed in its place, but something else they were trying to promote. So they have this episode at the end of January that was, you know, the big sort of double episode movie kind of thing, and then no new episodes for a month. Came back in March with the next one. So
right, so the writers would have been probably thinking about, you know, their next job, moving on to the next thing. Being creative types, they might start getting sick of writing the same characters all the while.
I don't think David Simon, you know, was sick of writing the characters because he hadn't.
Yeah.
I think it was just, you know, he was sometimes held back from what he wanted to do by certain things, either at the network or even the producers. You know, said we're not going to do certain things with certain characters because we want to maintain certain stories, or we want to keep certain actors around, so we don't want you to, you know, kind of upset the formula too much. But the main thing, the main positive they got with David Simon was his ability to write realistic dialogue, having been somebody who was in, you know, observing the real police for a year,
Yeah.
getting that perspective. So he had, in addition to Gary Diodario, his consultation, you know, being a real cop, a squad leader, and all that, you know, that they had input from a cop as well as somebody who was a journalist who spent time with the cops. So they had those different perspectives on stuff.
Oh yeah, and I think the dialogue definitely improved when he joined, and he did have that balance of, you know, they make the dialogue good, but you don't make it sound too snappy.
Yeah, and David Simon always tries to throw in some line because he said the cops said it so many times. The real ones he was with, where they talked about getting overtime. That there's another brief line in this one about getting overtime. So he puts that in there.
And that also makes sense when you think about that's important when the baseline salary is so low.
Yeah.
Because like they made that thing about because we recently found out that Falzone was being paid $34,000 a year, and I remember Chris Rock doing a routine in 1996 about someone having to pay alimony when they only earn $30,000 a year. She might just have to die.
Yeah. I know it's weird to hear those numbers and realize that I make more than that now. But of course, this is 20 years later, so the cost of living and all has gone up since then. But I don't know how much current homicide detectives in Baltimore make, but I imagine it's more than that.
Yeah. Yeah, especially with the politicians and the unions, but that's a different discussion. Yeah. Anyhow, what else about this? So yes, I did like the performance of Peter Garrity. I just thought the resolution of the episode was disappointing, but it's sort of like we've seen so much of like how Frank treats people in the box. It was like they're probably trying to find something new, a new angle that it could take, so that they're not repeating themselves with that.
Yeah, and they're probably that was another one of those cases where there was probably, you know, some pressure from the network to say, you know, you need, if this case is about killing priests, you need to resolve this and not have the killer go free. You know, not have this one be one of those that's not solved.
Also, I wasn't quite sure on what was the motivation for the priests for going after the priests, or was that just like part of the appeal a bit for you that there wasn't some great motivation behind it?
They never specifically said why, other than they just sort of implied that he figured it was that they just figured they'd be easy marks. You know, that they would be able to there wouldn't be a problem with the priest fighting back, that they'd be able to take them out easily and be able to steal their stuff, and that they've got, you know, fancy things they could sell. You know, it's kind of the idea. They don't, you know, Rock, of course, wasn't the one who actually did the murders, but you can sort of get from what he said that there's a little bit of, you know, maybe some resentment, animosity towards people who kind of preach a message that he doesn't agree with, in terms of he sees his reality that doesn't jive with the message they're you know, preaching. So there could have been some kind of, you know, resentment there, you know, some kind of, but they never really say, and that's another thing I like about Homicide, is that there's not always like some kind of, you know, there's not the typical thing of like the villain going, here's my motive in the next 5 minutes, here, let me break that down for you. And even on Law and Order, which, you know, in a lot of things as far as about the legal process, they try to maintain realism. They have a lot of scenes where the killer eventually has this scene where they, like, you know, break down everything that led them to do what they did. And I'm not saying that doesn't happen in real life. There's some people who do that, but there's much more where, you know, they just simply don't, you know. They only do what's legally required of them. Even in somebody who's pleading guilty, that they tell them you need to tell, you know, in your words what crime you committed, they still tend to stick to the facts rather than go on long explanations. The only time they do that is like if they're on their lawyer puts them on the stand to tell, you need to tell your sob story to get the jury on your side, you know, because they'll do that. But the Law and Order will have these like tearful confessions in the office of the DA. I'm like, there's probably not a whole lot of those.
Yeah, it all gets a bit repetitive after a while.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things I love about Homicide, one of the reasons it's one of my favorite shows, is because I honestly don't feel that way. Like, in terms of, you know, even the last season, I felt like there were still plenty of things they could have done.
Yeah.
You know, there was more stories they could have told, for sure. Because to me, when you set up a format that's great as it is, in terms of you have the possibilities of not only, you know, the interesting aspects of like the murder cases themselves, but the personal aspects and the way they work with partners. You always have that sort of playing off each other in terms of discussing a case, discussing personal life, kind of mixing the two in different ways, keeping the dialogue snappy, as you called it. You know, like I said, that's why I would do, you know, if I had the ability to do like a big finish, you know, Homicide audio series, I would definitely do it if I could get any of the original actors to come back. And because, you know, you wouldn't have to come up with some amazing case in order to have an interesting show, you know. So I still think that, you know, you could say certain elements are repetitive, but I really didn't feel like when I watched the last episode of Homicide, I don't have any kind of sense of relief of, oh, it's over or something like that. It's more like, you know, just reminds me how good a show it was, that even in the moments, even in the sort of waning moments of the show, which, you know, aren't as good as how it began, but I still don't, it's not one of those shows I feel like this went on too long. You know, there's some shows where it's kind of like, maybe they went a season or two too long, and I never felt that way about Homicide. So.
Yeah. I was just thinking that Homicide would be good if it was like set in 100 years in the future, like you get some like extra elements. But then I was thinking, hang on a minute, Ben, that would be rather expensive to make.
Or 100 years in the past.
Yes, that would be.
We'll actually have not that exactly, but we'll have something in sort of that direction coming up later in this season of Homicide. You'll have a very interesting episode, which
Yeah, and they'll probably do what Star Trek does, where the ancestors look exactly the same as the current cast.
Not exactly, but
except they have big tashes.
Definitely a unique episode. I would say that I think you'll probably enjoy coming up.
Oh, good. So we could end on that high note. I've not got anything else.
All right. Well, I guess you can give your rating.
I'll give it about a 7. Yeah.
If I rate both parts together as one whole, then I would say 8. But I think if we look at the two parts together, I gave the first part an 8. I would give this part a 7 because I think the setup was better than the conclusion. Which I've said before, it's easier to write setup than it's easier to write conclusion. So it's almost a cop-out, but at the same time, I like cliffhangers. I like suspense. So in an episode that has more of that, I'm going to enjoy that more. Though in the second part, we still got, the question of what's Lewis doing, what's going to happen to Kellerman. So you had a little bit of the continuing story going besides the main case they were dealing with, even though that was wrapped up for the most part. So, yeah, I'd give the second part a 7. So that would be an average of 7 for this one. And join us next time for an episode entitled Lies and Other Truths.
Ooh. Let's just end. Here we go. Bye, folks.
Bye.